All right, good evening, everyone. It is May 1st, 2024. This is a public meeting of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, Settlement and Policy Subcommittee meeting, and I'm going to hand it over to Co-Chair Byron to get us started.
Thank you, Dory. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for all 23 people for being here. I appreciate the commitment. My name is Byron Vaughn. I am PCCEP member and co-chair of the Settlement and Policy Subcommittee, along with Kip Silverman. I pass it to Kip.
Hi there, Kip Silverman. What Byron just said, I use he, him pronouns, and I am working off my mobile. So if somebody else from PCCEP just wants to jump in, I thought I heard Tia on the line.
Sure. My name is Tia Palafox. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a PCCEP member and the co-chair of the Community Engagement Subcommittee. Thank you. I'll look through the, I see Carrie.
Hi, thanks, Tia. My name's Carrie Driver. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a PCCEP member and a member of the Community Engagement Committee as well. I see Nathan.
Good evening, everyone. Nathan Castle, he, him pronouns, PCCEP member, a member of the subcommittee.
And I think that's it for our PCCEP members. And if anyone from the city or PPB, DOJ wants to introduce themselves now, I'll start. I'm Dory Grabinski, PCCEP project manager. Kokal as well.
Everybody, I'll jump in. Stephanie Howard, Mayor's Office. Good to see you all.
Evening, folks. Mary Claire Buckley from the Portland Police Bureau.
I'm Tom Christoph. I'm the compliance officer and community liaison.
I'm Monique Jenkins. I'm also a part of the Kokal team.
I see Jared just came on from DOJ as well.
And I think we can move on. I don't know if we were waiting. It looked like maybe Jared was trying to unmute. If you're there, Jared, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late. Jared Hager with Department of Justice. Just got done with the late dinner.
Oh, no worries. Thanks. We were just trying to assess the situation. Cool. Okay, and can we get slides again, please? And Byron, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Dory. Community agreements. Listen actively and respectfully. Share airtime. Be present and open to new information perspectives. Assume positive intent. Respect each other. Respect the group. Be okay with ambiguity. Call out bias. Ask questions to clarify. Communicate directly, honestly, and respectfully. Speak your own truth. Overview of today's meeting is an update on subcommittee check-ins and the Kokal Town Hall on their fourth quarter draft report, and then we'll have 7:50. We'll have public comments. Dory, before we move over, did you have anything extra to add? Maybe I'm not sure.
No, I don't. Although I will say quickly, because we didn't put this in the update section, and I should have. I wanted to let everyone know that PCCEP is finishing up a recruitment cycle for members, and we had a really amazing batch of applications and interviews. And I think we will be joined by some incredible new members pretty soon as we get that all sorted out with appointments and final decisions and everything. So just wanted to let PCEP members and our community attendees and everyone else know that we've had some really excellent developments there, and we're looking forward to sharing that with everybody.
Cool.
Oh, were you saying something, Tia?
No, just cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very exciting. And so for updates, I think we're going to Kip here. And we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I can do the updates. There is a status conference hearing May 15th, 9 a.m. at the Margot Hatfield U.S. Courthouse. This is I believe it happens quarterly or intentional to be quarterly for the different parties in the settlement agreement to update the judge about progress being made. Hang on a second, let me scroll in, and I can't read it anyway. In the hearing, the city and DOJ will ask the court to appoint the MPS and Associates as the independent monitor for the settlement agreement, and this was the independent monitor was approved going forward in the last time this meeting was held, which I believe was November. So next slide, please. The independent monitor update, City Council will vote on accepting the procurement report, naming MPS and Associates as the selected candidate tomorrow at 2:25 p.m. If it's approved and the court accepts it, the independent monitor will be appointed on May 15th, I guess. And we've been talking about wanting to establish, once this is all approved, establishing a connection and build a relationship with the independent monitor, sharing ideas on what the committee would like to see done differently, especially as it relates to community engagement and reporting, and hopefully have some interim reports as well, or updates as they go along. So we're pretty excited about this, the advent of this, and looking forward to starting to build that relationship, assuming it all gets approved. Next slide, please. On the 17th, the PCEP had unanimously voted to move forward on sending the recommendation on Portland Street response to Mayor Wheeler's office. And once again, as a reminder, the mayor has up to 60 days to make a formal response to our recommendation. They could absolutely do it sooner as well. We really hope that everybody takes a moment to look at the final version of the recommendation. And if you do support it, please reach out to the mayor's office and let them know. We will also be sending the recommendation to the Department of Justice and plan to present the main points before Judge Simon at the May 15th meeting at the Hatfield building. And if you do support it, please show up for that as well. And then one last thing briefly, Byron and I are working on the agenda for the Settlement and Policy Subcommittee, along with Nathan and Leslie, and we're starting some discussions on that. We want to focus on a few different things, one of them being reviewing and discussing directives. One of the ones that's top of mind, not only with the upcoming election, but everything that's been happening across campuses, including PSU, is the newly formed public order group that was originally the, I believe, tactical response team to engage in when protests happen. And what we would like to do in the very near future is invite representatives from the Portland Police Bureau to come talk about the public order team and what their plans on formation are, what directives they will be working under, and what, if anything, they'll be doing differently from the previous incarnations of the team. If you all recall, there was one officer from the 2020 protests that was charged with striking a protester. The charges were dropped on that. However, there were somewhere around 30 different lawsuits against the city based on the Portland police response to those protests. So it's really important, we feel, as part of the settlement agreement, that we also have a very in-depth look at how the Portland police plans on responding. And again, as I said, what, if anything, they plan on doing differently so that we don't have a repeat of 2020 or earlier protests and lawsuits against the city. Beyond that, we also will be following up with next steps of truth and reconciliation work. And we're excited to be pursuing these efforts, as well as more to come, and engaging with you all. And once again, please, please, please offer us feedback and input. And we appreciate you all being here. Next slide. Okay. And we're off to the Q4 Cocoa Town Hall on the Cocoa Town Hall on the Q4 draft report. And I assume that Tom will be taking lead from here.
Real quick, Kip, I think there's a little time reserved if if not, also completely fine. If any of the subcommittee if any of the subcommittee members had any thoughts or questions about those updates that were shared.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Particularly about the ongoing work, I think.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm working off mobile, so I'm not seeing chat.
That's kind of why I'm chiming in. Yeah. So, PCCEP members, did anyone have questions about really any of the updates, or particularly any of that ongoing work, or any action items or next steps that you wanted to clarify for the time being?
Oh, and I do see a question about the PSR recommendation. Can somebody add that link if they haven't already?
Yes, that has been added.
Okay, cool.
Kip, I see nobody had any suggestions. I was thinking about body cameras, so we can look back into crowd control mixed with body camera work and how that works hand in hand. Just put a caveat out there into the people's head to think about something like that, or how that coincide, how that works with it when they're recording or they doing crowd control. Anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great point, Byron, and that's why I think we need to reserve some time to understand how the team is going to be working and what directives they're going to be working under. And I'm not sure when exactly the cameras go into effect, but that's important to understand as well.
Does anyone here, can anyone here share an update about the status of the body cam implementation?
I'm happy to. I know we're working on it. There's a lot of technical work that has to go into the facilities to support them. So folks have been working really hard. I think our plan is to roll them out as quickly as possible. Hopefully, we're going to be able to start that as soon as June, and the goal is to have it completed by the beginning of fall. I'm also going to drop in the chat a link to the body cam directive, which identifies the current rules regarding how body cams can be used in any kind of public order events.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephanie.
I'm also seeing a number of questions in the chat come in about the new crowd control team, or public order. Some people are using that term. For those who maybe weren't following that as closely, is anyone able to share a little bit about that development for PPB?
Yeah, I'm happy to also give an update on that. But Mary Claire, you feel free to chime in if I miss anything. So we are, based on council's direction, we are working to rebuild that team. That team is not completely screened and assembled yet. So what we have is our current standing public order response, which is a mobile field force, and then working obviously in a variety of different ways. But no, that team is gonna, it's in process. They will need, to go through training and things like that are in development right now. And I'll just note also that the development of that, if you'll recall, is at the recommendation of specifically the Independent Monitor LLC group and others. So if anyone has any questions about what the recommendations were for redeveloping that team, I'm happy to drop a link to that report in the chat as well.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Stephanie.
Yes.
And if somebody could save the chat out for me, if I don't get home before the meeting ends.
For sure. Tia, do
Thank you.
you want to ask your question, Tia? You're muted.
In regards to the truth and reconciliation work, will there be a team for that? And I'd like to be working with that if possible.
Yeah, I don't know that we've gotten that far as to what the next steps are, but it's a big piece of work, so it probably makes sense to have I don't want to say task force. What's the term I'm looking for? But a working group to work on that. And since it is a pretty broad topic, it would make sense to have people from all different aspects of PCCEP involved.
Thank you.
This is going to need a lot of public feedback on it.
Yeah.
We're definitely going to need a lot of public feedback on it, and hopefully that we have people show up and have their hats on ready to speak about truth and reconciliation work, or even if they need more help on understanding it, please Google it, because I had to Google it myself to understand it even more. So
Great, thank you.
Great. Any other questions from PCCEP or community members about any of the updates shared? Go ahead, Tia.
I didn't hear if we would. I didn't hear if we were going to be building a relationship with the independent monitor and how we might be able to introduce ourselves and how we'll partner.
Yeah, so our plan is, once they are approved by City Council and Judge Simon, that we would absolutely ask them to one of the meetings. I don't think it matters which one, but so that we can get to know them as well as the public, and talk about how we can work closely together on the work that they're doing and the work that we're doing. So I think that how that all plays out remains to be seen until that meeting happens. But yeah, there's definitely that intention.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Chairs, are we good to move on?
I am, if y'all are.
All right, let's do
And
it.
over the next half hour or so, I'll be mobile. So if there is a question for me or something that comes up, please just give me a heads up on it.
Great. Okay, Cocal team, we're gonna hand it over to you now, and I think you should have the screen share. Yep, okay,
There
cool.
we go. So like I said, my name's Tom Christoph. I am the compliance officer and community liaison. I just wanted to say thank you all for having us to be able to present our fourth quarter report. This report came out about a week ago, and what we there's going to be a 30-day comment period. I know that the week doesn't give you all necessarily a full chance to read the entire report, but what the plan is here tonight is to be able to give an overview of the report and to go through some of the highlights, talk about some of the progress that PPB has made, talk about where we've assessed each one of the paragraphs, and then there'll still be a full 30-day public comment period. But again, obviously happy to discuss it tonight and to hear your comments and feedback. So I know that we've talked about this a couple of times over the last presentations, but we still do want to just kind of give a debrief on the COCL's role, what the COCL does and what the COCL doesn't do. So we are completely independent from the city, from the police bureau, and from the Department of Justice. In the settlement agreement, the Department of Justice is the plaintiff. They're also the monitor. And I know that you guys have talked about the new incoming monitor, and we'll address that in a slide or two. But we're completely independent from the monitor. What we do is we collect and we review the documents and data the same way that DOJ does right now. We take those and we determine whether there is compliance with the requirements of the settlement agreement or whether there's not. And when we're making that determination, we then draft and develop these quarterly reports, and we draft and develop outcome assessments for each one of the sections. And we'll go through some of those tonight. What we don't do, though, is we don't manage or direct the PPB in the city. We call balls and strikes. If something is compliant with the settlement agreement, we say it is. If something isn't compliant, we say it isn't. But we also, we don't make the final determinations of compliance. That at the moment is the Department of Justice who makes the final determination as the monitor. We also don't create additional reform requirements. There are a number of things that we might suggest to the city or the PPB. But if it's not a requirement of the settlement agreement, we can suggest it as a matter of best practice, but we can't create it as a requirement for compliance. So we'll go to the next slide. So what we do for these quarterly reports, we collect all the information. We look at use of force reports. We look at complaints, the full administrative investigation. We look at PPB data, city data. We review policies. We do training observations. We've just recently done an observation of PPB's in service. We do these site visits where we come and we talk with PPB, we talk with PPB members. And then what we do is we take all of that together and we create a quarterly compliance assessment. We look at each substantive paragraph of the settlement agreement. And like I said, then we also do outcome assessments, looking at the data and looking at any trends that either we, the public, or PPB needs to be made aware of. We gather public feedback, and this again is the purpose of tonight's meeting, is to be able to present our report, be able to hear what the community thinks in terms of how we've assessed compliance, whether we found compliance or non-compliance, and we take those comments and we incorporate that feedback into our final report. What we also do is create a comment spreadsheet for each of the comments that we receive on the quarterly report, and we provide an individual response to each comment. At that point, then we provide a final report. We also do ongoing collaboration with our community engagement team, who's been doing outreach. If there's any collaboration that you guys want, please send us an email at portlandcocal@cna.org. And we can go on to the next slide. So for each one of the reports, we provide a report card. And like I said, for each one of the paragraphs, we determine whether there's substantial compliance or whether there's partial compliance. Where there is partial compliance, we then provide recommendations for achieving substantial compliance. Even if there is substantial compliance, like I said, at times we'll also provide suggestions to the city that may not be considered requirements for compliance, but are just things that the city could do just to overall improve the operations. We'll go to the next slide. So there's a couple of changes to the settlement agreement that I wanted to cover, and you guys have already covered this a bit tonight as well. So Mark Smith has been the finalist for the monitor position, and there is that May 15th status hearing. And so I won't repeat those points that you guys have already talked about, but I do encourage that relationship building with the new monitor. With some of the changes to the settlement agreement as part of bringing on the monitor, there's now partial termination. There were 40 paragraphs that were removed from being monitorable. So we don't cover those in our current report because for the fourth quarter, they were terminated. What has happened is that the PPB or the city has shown a sustained substantial compliance for so long that the parties agreed that those paragraphs could be removed. For future termination, and I'm sorry, it's not future termination, this should be future self-monitoring, is that there's 2 COCL reports and 1 monitor report finding insubstantial compliance. That would put it into a period of self-monitoring. Currently, there are 14 paragraphs that are already in self-monitoring. We do assess these as part of our compliance report. For going forward, the incoming monitor would have to approve that methodology. Go to the next slide. So here's just a quick summary of our Q4 compliance assessment. We found substantial compliance with 45 paragraphs. From our Q3 compliance assessment, this is 3 additional paragraphs that are now being found in substantial compliance. These paragraphs are in the use of force section with paragraph 76, and in the accountability section, paragraphs 126 and 128. For this quarter, though, we did find that PPB had lost substantial compliance with paragraph 122. When we get into that section, I'll talk a little bit more about what that paragraph is and where the lost compliance came from. So what that leaves is 11 paragraphs that we are finding in substantial compliance. There's 1 in the use of force section. There's 2 in the employee information system section, 4 in the accountability section, and 4 in the additional remedy section. And so we'll talk a little bit about each one of these that are still in partial compliance and what we've laid out as ways for PPB in the city to achieve the substantial compliance. So for section 3, which is the use of force, a little bit about what we do when we're assessing paragraphs within this section. What we do is we take 20 use of force cases, which is I think last time we had talked, it's about a 12% sample of use of force events within the quarter. We look at the FDCRs, which are the force data collection reports. We look at the after action reviews performed by the chain of command and supervision. We look at the forms that PPB members use to report their force. We look at the force data and the trend analysis conducted by PPB, as well as the review process by the chain of command, as well as the force inspector, to see if there's any issues that may not rise to the level of misconduct, but something that may imply there's a need to change policy or change training, or, you know, to give additional guidance to members. So what we had found, we'll go to the next slide for this section, is the areas that are in substantial compliance that are still monitorable. We have found a continued comprehensive force reporting and review system. So when a use of force event happens, officers fill out the force data collection reports, and we find comprehensive reporting of what happened during the event. We also find that when supervisors in the chain of commands review these force events, that they do a really good job of looking at each decision in the event. We call this a decision point analysis, and that the supervisors do a good job of taking a whole look at the entire event and making a determination as to whether the officer acted within policy or not. We have found standardized forms for the reporting. Again, the complete investigations using these forms. One of the things that we had found with section 3.2, and this is one of the newer things, is that there's now full substantial compliance with the force audit that the members within the force inspectors team are able to assess how often officers are fully and completely filling out the forms, but also identifying trends and forwarding those trends, as well as identifying outlying members who may need intervention. And I'll get into a little bit of that with the EIS section as well. The areas that aren't in substantial compliance, we continue to hold the position that there needs to be more consistent force reporting for control against resistance. And in our report for this quarter, we bring up a situation which I think really highlights the issues that we've identified. In this situation, there were 4 officers on a subject. Each, one officer had an arm, the other officer had the other arm. 2 of the other officers had 1 leg each. 3 of those officers filled out a force report saying that there was resistance, resisted handcuffing from the subject. The 4th officer didn't, and one of the reasons for this is because the resistance is the subjective interpretation from the officer. So this 4th officer said that they didn't feel any resistance, and we were in no position to say whether that officer did or didn't feel any resistance. It's just the question of, is that the most effective way of reporting force? Is that the most accurate way of reporting force? So one of the things that we've discussed with PPB are resolutions to this issue. And I can't discuss it right now because nothing's been finalized, but there has been discussions about how this issue could be resolved. So I anticipate this will be going into substantial compliance sometime in the future. Again, there's still things that need to be discussed, but these discussions have begun. So we'll go to the next slide on this. And for, like I said, for some of these sections, we do outcome assessments. For this quarter, we did an outcome assessment of use of force. And this is only a select excerpt from the larger table that we have in our outcome assessment. But what we did is we compared the last year to the last 4 years. I'm sorry, 5 years. So what we see consistent numbers across, when comparing last year to the last 5 years. about 16 to 18% of force was used on persons in mental health crisis. I'm sorry, with actual or perceived mental illness. And then when we look at the types of force, again, across the two different timeframes, generally consistent numbers. So we're not seeing the last year being, wildly fluctuating from the prior years. We do see some consistency when comparing the last year to the last 5 years. We can go to the next slide. And one of the things that we also track, and this is because it was important to the settlement agreement, is the use of CEW, or more commonly called tasers. What we see is generally around 3% of all use of force events involve the use of a taser. And again, this increased a little bit in 2020 to 3.6%, but when you're comparing 3.6 to 2.7, there's not a lot of variation there. So in general, CEW use has been about 3% across the entire time frame. So we can go to the next slide. So this is section 4. This is training. Again, tell you a little bit about the things that we do when we're reviewing this section. We take a look at PPB's needs assessments. We look at their training plans. We look at their audit reports. As I'll talk about in a bit, for this quarter, we talk about the training plan that was developed as a result of PPB's needs assessments. We review the learning management system records to make sure that all officers are receiving the training that they're required to. We observe training. Like I said, this is something that we've just done, as well as training evaluation reports, looking at whether officers believe that the training that they're receiving is valuable, as well as observing Training Advisory Council meetings, the TAC meetings, particularly as it relates to the force inspector's presentations of use of force. So we can go to the next slide for what we had found. For this section, we have found all paragraphs to be in substantial compliance. We have seen comprehensive needs assessments that take into consideration current laws, trends in use of force, input from the community, and a whole host of other factors that really inform what PPB trains on. We then take a look at we've seen consistent and positive training content and materials. One of the things that I know that we've been really impressed with most recently is the development of consistent and standardized training, really consistent training plans. We take a look at those evaluations, the reporting. We take a look at this standardized trainer standard. So one of the requirements of the agreement is that if you're a trainer, you can't have used excessive force against persons with mental illness over the last, I believe it's either 3 or 5 years. I apologize. But then also the presentations to the TAC. So like I said, we found all of these to be in substantial compliance. Next slide. So when we talk about the training outcome assessment, we're going to highlight a couple of the things that we have in our report. One of them is whether training was a good, or whether individual training courses were a good use of officers' training time. This is for both advanced academy and for online training. And as you can see from here, for across both training types, there's general strong agreement that the courses that officers are receiving are a good use of their training time. There's, maybe a couple of courses where officers may disagree, but on the whole, the training that members are receiving, they believe is useful. We can go to the next slide and we'll break this down a little bit more. So this is for advanced academies. And again, when you see the red, that the training that they are receiving is critical for future advanced academy students, or the yellow, that there's a recommendation to keep it if possible. One of the things that we discuss in the report, and you'll see it on here, is community engagement courses. And one of the things that I want to highlight here is that community engagement, it's not the same course every advanced academy. There's different courses that fall under the community engagement category. So when you're reading the report and you're looking at this graph, it's not that officers believe that community engagement is not important. It's that there's been individual courses that that may not have been as well received. And when you compare that to the courses that are received in CEW or courses that you receive in things like control tactics, all courses within those had more positive results, whereas community engagement, only, you know, one or two of the courses may have had the negative reviews, but that shouldn't be interpreted as community engagement is not important to the community or to the officers. So we'll go to the next slide. Going to the section 5, the community-based mental health services. Again, these are paragraphs that are now under self-monitoring. So one of the things that we do when we're reviewing the methodologies for these is we look at the status of the Unity Center, as well as PPB participation with stakeholder groups. We'll go to the next slide on this. And what we found is that these are also completely in substantial compliance. So the city does have a Unity Center. And what we've seen is that officers are dropping people off at the Unity Center. It is operating as intended. And that PPB continues to have collaboration with community-based mental health service providers, as well as ongoing participation in committees that are focused on mental health and wellness. So we'll go to the next slide with section 6, crisis intervention. And this was one of the sections of the settlement agreement that had the most paragraphs put into a terminated phase where they were no longer monitorable. So within this section, there's 3 paragraphs related to the operation of the Behavioral Health Unit Advisory Committee and 1 paragraph related to the operation of the Bureau of Emergency Communications, BOEC. So we have found all 4 of these paragraphs to be in substantial compliance. We've observed the BHUAC meetings. We found that they continue to talk about relevant and important things related to crisis response. And then we've also, the 1 paragraph that relates to BOEC talks about their auditing of calls and making sure that they've got, that their system of crisis triage is operating. And BOEC does a number of audits to make sure that when somebody calls and is in a mental health crisis, that the call takers and dispatchers within BOEC are able to recognize that and able to triage that call to the appropriate responder. So we'll go on to the next slide, which is some of the outcome assessments that we've done. This is just the number of ECIT calls and how they've fluctuated over the quarters. Again, we see some fairly consistency across the board in terms of the number of ECIT calls. And again, some of these are going to change by seasons, but yeah, the overall numbers have remained fairly consistent. This slide, when we go to the response rate, I think the biggest thing that I want to highlight here, and we had commented on it in several of our reports, was North Precinct's response rates for ECIT calls. And so response rate means getting an ECIT officer to an ECIT call. And so for North Precinct, we had seen overall lower numbers and it continuing to get lower. And I think one of the things that was a bit concerning was between the fourth quarter and the first quarter, the fourth quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of 2023, it was a 53% of the time when there was an ECIT call, there was an ECIT response. What PPB had done was done some targeted recruitment for ECIT in North Precinct. And one of their most recent ECIT cadres, you know, one of the most recent classes, that it had more North precinct officers, and what we've seen is that this correlated with a increase in the ECIT response rate. Now, ECIT, the North precinct still remains as one of the lower response rates out of the lowest response rates out of the 3 precincts. But again, I think that that increase was a positive step and something that, you know, reverses a trend that I think we had seen before and had concerns about. So we'll go on to section 7, which is the employee information system. Within this section, there was a couple of paragraphs that were cut out from there. But some of the paragraphs that were remaining looked at the EIS program structure, the EIS data, as well as the PPB analysis that looks at the EIS data. And what we also do is we observe command meetings, and I'll get into this in a second. We'll go to the next slide. So we had found insubstantial compliance, most of the requirements within this section. So there's some things that when an officer hits 3 uses of force in a 6-month period, they're required to have an EIS review. What we've seen is that these EIS alerts are generated. The EIS system is doing that with respect to how it's supposed to operate for flagging officers. There's also some EIS reviews that are required when there's somebody who's new to the command, or they do an annual evaluation. These are things that we've seen happen. You know, I talked about the thresholds. Those thresholds remain, you know, X number of events in X number of months. Those thresholds are still used. One of the things that we had seen for this quarter, and this also relates to paragraph 76, is when we've observed outliers that were identified by the force inspector, we've observed positive communication. We've observed them being raised to the commanders and something happening with them. And so we've really seen, you know, this has been an improvement over what we've identified in the past, where there was a lack of clarity in terms of how officers were identified. I think what we've seen here is a much more consistent application of one of PPB's SOPs. It's called SOP number 5. But this is really where the crux of that issue has been addressed by PPB and resolved in terms of some of the outlying issues that we've had. The reason that there's a couple of paragraphs, 116 and 117, the reason that these aren't in substantial compliance is that we're still saying that a evaluation of EIS's overall effectiveness needs to occur. And this is something that the parties have disagreed on. We've asked the parties to resolve this issue, but we haven't gotten an answer on that. And so this is really the issue that's holding paragraphs 116 and 117 out of compliance. So we'll go on to the next slides, and we did an outcome assessment of EIS, and we did a similar outcome assessment for members' use of force. So that was 2 quarters ago, and so for this quarter we focused on member complaints. So what I want to do here is explain some of these tables. There was, out of the 812 members within PPB, 221 of them had 0 complaints over the last, this was a 5-year evaluation. There were some members, though, who had a higher number of complaints. And in particular, we look at those with 8 or more. So this is the top 2%. So if you're looking down at the 17, there was 1 member who had 17 complaints, 1 member who had 15 complaints, 2 members who had 12, 4 members who had 11, one member with 10, 5 with 9, and 3 with 8. So these, if you add up the percentages on the right side, these are the top 2%. So we'll go to the next slide, because the question is, with these members, is EIS able to identify them? And one of the things that we've seen is that, yes, EIS was able to flag these members. So when we look at this column, total number of complaint alerts, you'll see that the members with the highest number of total complaints, they did receive alerts from EIS. The system was able to capture them. Similarly, the system was these complaint alerts were sent on to the RU managers. However, what we haven't seen is that the complaint alerts, those specific complaint alerts, led to an intervention. And I want to take a moment here to clarify one thing. This does not mean that the officers did not receive any intervention for any alert. We're looking at the system effectiveness of, you have a threshold related to complaints. Was there an intervention based on those complaint alerts? And what the data showed was that even if they got interventions for other alerts, there wasn't a consistent intervention for the complaint alerts. And like I said, there may be other interventions that have happened, but we're looking at the outcome and the effectiveness of the system. And so the question is, if you have these thresholds related to alerts, does that lead to interventions? And it's not consistently. So as you can see, a number of the complaints, the complaint alerts, didn't result in an intervention. And those that did, one of the officers received a 90-day monitoring intervention, but for the other members, the intervention was, it's an intervention called coaching conducted, where their direct supervisor talks with them, has a coaching debrief with them. But again, it's not consistent that the alerts will lead to an intervention. And we can go to the next slide, talk about section 8, the accountability. This was the section where we had found one paragraph has now fallen out of substantial compliance. When we're looking at this section, and we're conducting our review, like I said, we look at a sample of administrative investigations. We review the AIM data. We look at OIS's events because there's OIS requirements. There's protocols for what happens after an OIS event. We do interviews with city and PPB personnel. We observe CRC and PRB meetings. I know that there hasn't been a CRC appeal in a while, but we have done PRB meetings and we observe those. And then we look at PPB directives to see whether officers are being held accountable to those directives. So what we have found, the areas that are in substantial compliance, we have found now that the investigation timelines, this was a finding that we made in our Q3 report, that there's been substantial compliance with getting administrative investigations completed within 180 days. We have found compliance with those OIS officer-involved shooting protocols. Investigations of force and retaliation. I talk about the PRB operations and the CRC operations. It is that has partially been complied with. I'll talk a little bit about the PRBs when we get into the areas that aren't in substantial compliance. But overall IPR operations, as well as communication and transparency. Where we have found not substantial compliance, the first one, this tolling for criminal investigations, this was paragraph 122, the paragraph that has recently fallen out of substantial compliance. And the reason for this is because we've recently been told that what PPB has been doing is when they're tolling for criminal investigation, excuse me, they're also tolling for the subject's criminal investigation. So the person who was the subject or who was shot by PPB, if they survive and they have a criminal investigation, PPB has been tolling for those. This is inconsistent with PPB's directives, inconsistent with how we've interpreted and how DOJ has interpreted paragraph 122. And so this is until this issue is resolved, we had found them to have fallen out of substantial compliance. We also talk about PRBs. In this report, we discuss the PRB for this quarter that happened, where we didn't find the PRB to be very useful at all for the city. And what happened in that was there was an unidentified officer that a PRB was held for, and so all of the findings were held for nobody. And it was a result of PPB's requirements under paragraph 133 that if there's a finding of liability, they have to initiate an investigation, but that finding of liability didn't identify an officer. And so we overall found it to be a unnecessary PRB, and like I said, not very useful, and didn't resolve the prior issues that we've had with PRBs. We've also required an updated corrective action guide directive. This is Directive 338, and that is just updating that directive is the only thing that's withholding compliance on paragraph 137. And then finally, with paragraph 139, which is kind of a catch-all paragraph on the accountability system, we're just looking to make sure that officers are uniformly held responsible for policy. So we can go on to the next slide. So for section 9, the community engagement and creation of PCCEP, this is you guys. Again, we observe the PCCEP meetings. We review the recommendations. I know that you guys had just talked about one of the recommendations that you had made. We also look at those city responses as well. We'll interview city staff, as well as review the community engagement plan and engagement metrics, as well as the traffic stop data. So we can go on to the next slide. And similar as what we had found in our Q3 report, we continue to find all paragraphs within this section to be in substantial compliance. We find operational and administrative support for PCCEP, that PPB continues to use the community engagement plan and the annual report, and that those presentations occur. We continue to find the traffic stop data is being used, as well as the metrics for community engagement and outreach. We can go on to the next slide, which is the final section. These are the remedies that were put into place after DOJ's findings of non-compliance. So the 4 paragraphs that we found to be in substantial compliance are related to updated forced data collection reports, the FDCRs, ensuring that there is a line item within the budget for overtime for police training, that a civilian dean at the training division was hired, and then Dr. Rodriguez continues to serve in that role, and that the annual reports are released and shared in a timely manner. The areas that we continue to find have not reached substantial compliance. I will say that for each one of these, there is a time requirement that's necessary, and that there has been that just because they're not in substantial compliance doesn't mean that progress isn't being made. So for paragraph 189, that is the Independent Monitor LLC, IMLLC, their assessment of the city's response to the crowd control events. As we put in our report, the city has recently put in a 180-day self-assessment response to IMLLC, and IMLLC will be coming back fairly soon to be doing a follow-up assessment. For paragraph 192, these requires investigation into supervisors who allowed force during protests and inadequate reporting of force. these 4 investigations associated with 192, they are still ongoing. And I know that I say this every time, we can't comment on open investigations other than to say they are still ongoing. You guys have already talked about the implementation of body worn cameras, and we all know that that's coming in the next couple of months. And that's something that I know that, you know, you all should be very excited to have once it gets fully rolled out. The body worn cameras are something that I know the Cocal team has been advocating for a long time. And it is very exciting that officers are now going to be having them. And then finally, the creation of the Community Police Oversight Board. And again, this is something that is ongoing. And I know the steps have been taken, but it's something that can't be in substantial compliance yet because there still is work to be done. And I believe that's the last slide. Like I said, I apologize that the report was released on the 23rd and we're having this meeting now. We will accept feedback though, all the way up until May 24th. And you can email that feedback and comments to portlandcocal@cna.org. And with that, I will again say thank you very much for having us and to be able to present our report to you tonight.
Thank you, Tom. So at this point, we'll go into question and Q&A space for the report. I see one hand. Just raise your virtual hand and you'll go ahead and be called on. Tia. Tia, you're on mute.
I wanted to know what may be happening with the lower response rate at the North Precinct in regards to the ECIT.
So there's a number of things that can be happening. One is still the need, I think, to get a couple of more ECIT officers out there. And like I said, one of the things that PPB did, to their credit, is they did a targeted recruitment into North Precinct. I think that, like I said, they've gotten some more in there. And I think that that's helped with the response rate. The other piece is where officers are needing to spend their time elsewhere. Are they available? Are all officers available enough to be able to reserve the specialized response for these specialized officers? And so in our report, we don't break it down by the precinct, but what we see is that when somebody isn't responding, when there isn't an ECIT response to an ECIT call, one of the things that we've talked with PPB in the city about is looking at the reasons why with a little bit more granularity. So in the Q2 and Q3 of 2023, the category other was 19% of why there wasn't an ECIT officer to an ECIT call. And anybody that knows statistics, when you've got 20% other, you want to look to see whether there's some categories that could be broken out from there. But 23% were not dispatched. And again, that may be that one. There may be different reasons for that, but 49% of the time they were dispatched and cleared, which means that they were dispatched, but they were called off either because they weren't needed, another officer had it handled, or because a supervisor felt that they were needed elsewhere. And so they were called off by that supervisor.
I have one more question. Who's on the responsibility unit and what are their qualifications?
So the RU manager for this is the term that it's most often when we're talking about the precincts, it's the precinct commander. So within different units and divisions, you might have the RU manager. I think for the purposes of what we're talking, it would be the precinct commander. And then so, I mean, the qualifications of each individual precinct commander, yeah, I don't know that I'm gonna get into each one of them, but yeah, that's who we're talking.
Thank you. Thanks for all your details.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and thanks for the question in the chat, Dan, as far as can community members chime in. So we'll take PCEP members as priority questions, and then we'll go ahead and take community members. So I'm seeing Byron right now, and then we'll head to community members if there are no PCEP members' hands. Go ahead, Byron.
Thank you, Frida. Good evening, Tom. The EIS effectiveness, could you elaborate a little bit more on that, on parts of the overall of the system? Is it old? I'm just guessing right now. Is it old? Does it need to be updated? With these a little bit more manpower or the right manpower dealing with this?
So does it need to be updated? I will go back to what COCL doesn't of creating additional reforms. So I think there's a number of things. So when you're using threshold EISs, there's elements of it that the supervisors have to take into consideration. You know, when somebody uses force 3 times in 3 months, is that because they represent a potentially problematic officer, or is it because they're working in an assignment, you know, which may lead to them having 3 uses of force, you know? So in terms of whether the EIS is effective, the answer is we don't know.
Right.
Because a comprehensive assessment needs to be done. Some of the outcome assessment stuff that we've done, it is one of the analyses that should be done to determine effectiveness, but it's not the totality of analyses that should be done to determine effectiveness. You know, one of the things that really does need to be done to determine effectiveness is also talking with the officers. Do they find that the EIS system is a legitimate way of identifying potentially problematic officers? If you get a bunch of officers who say this is not legitimate, then they won't accept the interventions. So is it that you know, that the interventions aren't working, or is it that they're just not accepting them? You know, it's, again, there is a 360-degree way of reviewing EIS systems, and this is exactly why we've said that it does need to be done, but without both parties agreeing that it does need to be done that way, then we can't do the type of analysis that would need to be done. So in terms of your question is, does it need to be replaced? Don't know. It needs to be assessed. Does it need to be enhanced? Don't know. It needs to be assessed. I can tell you what my thoughts are, but my thoughts aren't backed by the empirical evidence that would be needed to make that firm determination of whether it is effective in the context of paragraph 116.
Because it sounds like, and this would be my final point. It seems like if we can get the officers comfortable coming to this system, there'll be a little bit more forthcoming with whatever, when we hope that they already are forthcoming. And yet we just don't want to make it too simple for them where it becomes, you know, oh well, and you know, it's business as usual. So
yeah,
thank you for your time, Tom.
No, and one of the things I think exactly to that point is if members are finding it disciplinary, well, that's an issue because EIS is supposed to be non-disciplinary. If they're finding it wellness related, and I actually just did a study on this, If they are finding it to be wellness, they're much more likely to find it legitimate. They're much more likely to accept the interventions. And so, like I said, you also need to talk with the officers. Are they finding it disciplinary? And if that's the case, and Byron, you had just said, are they coming to this system? Are they embracing it as a positive element of PPB? The answer is hopefully, you know, and if they are, then therein lies the acceptance of the interventions. Therein lies the success of the program and the effectiveness of the program. But you do want them. You'd want them to come to it and be okay with being flagged by EIS. And right now, I don't know that I don't know if they are looking at it as a positive system within PPB or as a punitive system within PPB.
Next, Kayla.
Hi, I had a question or just kind of more of a response. It sounded like there was some positive when you did the review for general feedback, but there seems to be some inconsistencies with the complaint-based alert. Is that correct? And if it is a complaint-based, is there a need to create a policy for more consistency?
So the two different pieces that I was talking about with the EIS, one of them is a peer comparison component where the force inspector and the EIS administrators are looking at whether the persons, you know, the officers who are using the highest, comparatively higher levels of force compared with other members within their same precinct and within the same shift. When those officers are being identified by the force inspector, the conversations, how those members are identified and the conversations with the commanders, we're seeing positive, we've seen more positive conversations with respect to those officers. And so that was the more positive piece of this, is that how those outliers are identified and how those outliers are discussed. That was where we've seen improvement. The second piece of it is the thresholds. If you are the thresholds of 3 complaints within 6 months, are those members who are hitting the thresholds, are they being forwarded to the commanders, and are there interventions related to those thresholds? That's where that table came from in terms of they may be being discussed in the context of other alerts or other interventions, but not, the data doesn't show that they're being discussed in the context of the complaint thresholds. And so again, it raises the question of, well, then are those complaint thresholds effective? And so EISs, they can be complicated systems. You can have the peer comparison element of it as well as the threshold comparison element of it. And so I don't know that we are talking about, we are kind of just talking about those two as the separate pieces of it. And like I said, the 360-degree assessment that would need to be done would include those pieces, but then so much more.
Dan?
Oh, thank you. Hi, this is Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns with the group Portland Cop Watch. Sorry I was a little late tonight, but I did get to read the whole report. And kind of on that note, while it was released on the 23rd, we, the community, didn't get it till the 25th. So I just spent 6 days cramming in a 100-page read. I would have liked to have the full 8 days. All right, so just following up on that last discussion, the top 17 complaint getters only led to 6 interventions. And so only 5 people on that 17-person list had no sustained complaints, although one of the people who didn't have a sustained complaint got an intervention anyway. This does seem very inconsistent. It seems like this is the kind of thing that police complain about all the time, that they're not being consistently addressed. Now, I'm going to try to make a whole bunch of points, so you don't have to respond to that right now. Maybe you can take notes. The other issues, which will be in the forthcoming analysis from CopWatch, is that you have done these outcome assessments on a lot of these sections, but not on paragraph 148 about traffic stops. And you keep putting in a recommendation that the community should continue discussing things with the Bureau about the disparities in traffic stops. Well, I think that you should look at the outcomes and see that they're not changing and comment on the fact that just because they're reporting it isn't changing the behavior. The Police Review Board, that court case, I think maybe I misunderstood what you were trying to say in the report. I think I understood it better in your presentation, that they weren't allowed to change the finding because they didn't have more information that could overturn what the court said. And that may be partly because they couldn't identify the officer. But I don't think it's a waste of time. I think it's really important, especially for the community members, to participate in those discussions and learn more about what the rules are and how they may or may not have been broken. The IPR investigations are way over 180 days into these commanders. I don't know why you can't at least make a comment that there's a paragraph that says all investigations have to be done in 180 days, and why is this taking so long? Because the community, those protests happened 4 years ago. The tolling thing, I'm just very surprised that nobody noticed originally that they were not tolling or taking time out of the 180 days for when an officer was on paid leave or some other kind of leave, and that got fixed. But then nobody noticed until now that they're also tolling for when the community member is facing criminal charges. This is outrageous. I'm very glad you pointed it out, but it's just amazing that it took so long for anybody to realize this. 43% of the strikes and kicks in the last 5 years all happened last year, and I wonder if there might be a reason for that, and if it's something you're going to address in a revision of this. Why don't cops like the community engagement? And you sort of addressed that again in your presentation, but it still begs the question. Like, you're kind of assuming that they got the information from other classes, but is there something else going on?
So Dan, can I hit on that one real quick? And I apologize for interrupting you. One of the reasons for that is for the other classes, the lesson plans and the presentation materials are developed by PPB and the members within it, and who have a bit more experience in doing those types of more formalized training. With some of the community engagement classes, they are community groups who have expertise in community engagement, who have expertise in working with the community, but may not have the formal training experience. And so it's not the topic of the class, but it's the how the training is developed and how the training is delivered, because they're not professional trainers. And that's, I just want to, because I know that we did discuss that in the report a bit, is that they're not trainers who are developing it. And that's where I think that the use of the responses came from. Again, not necessarily about community engagement as a topic.
Okay, well, I'll go back and reread that because I don't remember reading that specific element. All right, I only got 4 more. I'll be done. Why do you think the ECIT is more likely to bring people to jail, which makes no sense if they're more attuned to people with mental health crisis? You've written a couple of times now, the force inspector needs to use their experience to determine whether or not to report officers for their repeated uses of force, but the force inspector turns over about once a year. We've had 6 in the last 7 years, so they don't really have experience. So there should really be specific guidelines so that's more consistent. Just a brief note for PCCEP in your paragraph about them. You missed one of their meetings, the community engagement meeting on October 11. I want to make sure they get credit where it's due. And then council did not, as opposed to what you wrote in the report, adopt a city code about the oversight board. They changed the draft city code that they're presenting to other people and will come back for a vote later. And I think that's a very important nuance, because I think people might think that they already voted on what they're going to say in the code. But we're in the community, especially those of us who worked in the PAC, are hoping they're going to come back and make some changes before they adopt that code. Thank you.
That's an important distinction, and thank you as always, Dan.
All right. With Barb's permission, we'll go to Dr. Silver.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing well, ma'am. How are you?
I want to engage with you a little bit about the comments you made twice now about the police not saying they don't like community engagement. And you've given reasons why that slide is the way it is, and that it may be because the community engagement trainers were not professional trainers, etc. But how do you really know that the police don't like community engagement? Maybe they don't. Maybe that's what they're telling you.
I think if that was the case, that for all of the courses, you would see negative reactions. And that's not what, so what these are aggregated results across a number of different courses. You know, again, this is Advanced Academy. Advanced Academy goes for, I believe, I don't want to, Mary Claire, how many weeks does Advanced Academy go for?
Well,
What's that?
12
weeks. Okay. So these are several classes within those 12 weeks, those 3 months of courses. So when we're talking about all of the different community engagement classes that they receive across those 12 weeks, when we're talking about, you know, all of the different wellness courses that they receive, because we had also touched upon wellness, we don't see every single one of them having negative responses. There's a select that have them. And I know that, you know, just overall, the Bureau isn't averse to community engagement. So I guess that's the response.
All right, Tom. Yeah, let's go. Yeah, continue.
Dr. Soper, does that respond to your question though?
Well, sort of. I mean, you're saying you know that they're not adverse to community engagement, and I'm saying I don't know that. I mean, how do you know that?
Well, like I said, if you look at all of the courses, there's not, each course is not negative.
Understandable, but there still may be an overall feeling that compared to shooting guns, community engagement is not so important to police. Maybe, I'm saying.
I don't think that though the evaluations back that again. I think that there is, and you know, Kayla, I see you in the comments as well. Are you just paraphrasing what Natasha had said?
Oh, yeah, I was at the
Okay.
last one with Natasha and I forget the other officer's name. And it really just boils down to the budget because it is very costly and personnel and then just time. And it is actually like the most sought after thing. PPP really does want to like do more community engagement. They were talking about having community days where they just focus. It's like after you graduate from the initial community academy, that community academy, and then you go on and maybe you'll do like a day instead or so they were looking into that as well. It's just it really is a budget and time and personnel thing, unfortunately.
Well, and I'll also say that just in terms of overall PPP, you know, engagement as well as with training, they do hold the citizen academies to bring in community observation of the training. You know, again, we see elements of community engagement within the in-service trainings that we observe. We see just the overall concept of procedural justice being a part of each one of the lesson plans and how how the lesson plan achieves the goal of procedural justice. And so I don't think that the overall picture of PPB training supports the notion that they're not interested in community engagement training.
All right, thanks, Tom.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll go ahead and go with Byron, and then we'll come to you, Barb. We have time.
Tom, this is just a question I wanted to ask you, just your personal opinion. Should I be happy with substantial compliance? And I don't need you to go into the weeds too much in it. It's just, is it kind of like putting duct tape over something, or is it more or less, this is holding it stable?
Substantial compliance is a durable remedy to the findings from the Department of Justice. So, and I'll also say this is, and we've said this for the entire 9 years that we've been doing this, the settlement agreement's a floor. Should any community be happy with a floor? Probably not, but does that mean PPB has only reached the floor? I don't think so either. I think that, I think for several of the things that are in the settlement agreement, we've seen them reach the floor as well as go beyond it. Substantial compliance, the only thing that means is that there has been a remedy put in place for the issues that DOJ found. That those issues have been addressed in the way that the Department of Justice and the city agreed they should be addressed. One of the things that I'm sure PPB looks forward to, and I'm sure that the entire community looks forward to, is being able to move beyond the settlement agreement and life after the settlement agreement to really to be able to continue to move forward. Again, if anyone has taken the settlement agreement to be, we're creating a perfect department, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the settlement agreement. They've reached the floor for the paragraphs that we found them in substantial compliance. And again, like I said, gone beyond the floor, and in many of them as well. I think you should feel that they no longer, for those paragraphs, their policies and their operations no longer require a federal lawsuit. That, for those paragraphs, and that's the best way, that I can say it, because it's not supposed to be a perfect police department. It's that they no longer require a federal lawsuit for those paragraphs. I don't know if that's the most satisfying answer in the world, but that is the answer that the settlement agreement was designed to do.
Thank you so much for that.
Yes, sir.
Barb, you've been patient.
It's okay. Thanks for all the years of work on this. My question is, since we're introducing, or we're very interested in Portland Street Response and PSR getting funded, and when I was looking at the tables and the ECIT response, I'm not like super up on what BOIC's response indicators are, but I believe that there's some overlap between PSR and ECIT. And I'm wondering if that is at all confounding any of this, and if this is something that, like, the new monitor should be looking at differently, so that can be teased out and we can have information about that, if that makes sense.
Wait, can you say that again in terms of BOIC?
So when I was looking at the ECIT, when there was the ECIT response available, like where the number dipped in North Precinct, it had me thinking of BOIC and just the response, whether PSR is being sent or ECIT. And if I remember, there's some overlap. And
Yeah,
so that's what the question is rooted in. If you understand now, great.
So the response rates are just if there is an ECIT, a call that meets ECIT criteria, and those criteria are different than the PSR criteria. So when ECIT, they are generally considered a higher risk need for law enforcement, compared with a lower risk crisis call. But for PSR, I don't think and I don't want to say this as a full thing yet without being able to double check, but I don't believe that there would be a call that meets ECIT criteria, which would also meet PSR criteria.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
So we're still in, have a few more minutes for Q&A. And so if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, okay, well, seeing there's extra time, I'm going to double back and focus on one of my questions, which is why is it that you're not concerned, or you don't appear to be concerned, that IPR is way over the 180-day deadline on the 2020 investigations? And I understand they're trying to finish them all at one time, which I'm not sure I understand why, but I understand that's one of the reasons. And I also just came from a CR Citizen Review Committee meeting, and in the director's report, they said there are 6 open cases and not 4. Okay, thank you.
So I wouldn't say that I said that we weren't concerned. What I said was that there are open investigations that we can't comment on. In terms of the 180-day timeline, paragraph 121, where we assess substantial compliance with that is not whether there's an individual case that's open beyond 180 days. We look at substantial compliance, whether agency or whether investigations, full investigations on the whole are being completed within 180 days. There are going to be extremely complex investigations that will naturally take over 180 days. And again, I can't, without being able to talk about the 192 investigations, I'll say that paragraph 121 doesn't prohibit any case from ever going over 180 days. It is a substantial compliance. And so and again, I think this may go back to Byron's, question too, and, my response to that. The settlement agreement is the floor. And when you've got substantial compliance across a long enough timeline with a large enough number of cases, and we can see that overall there has been a durable remedy, that cases overall are being completed within 180 days. There's the substantial compliance for paragraph 121. It doesn't mean that, there's agreement or, acceptance or happiness that any case goes over 180 days. It's the balls and strikes of are a substantial number of cases. Is there substantial compliance with them being completed within 180 days? That says nothing about any individual case though. And with them being still open, there's not much that we can say about those cases. And so that's what I'm saying is I wouldn't conflate the two by not commenting on them, also meaning that we're thrilled that they've gone over 180 days because the community does want to know the outcome of those investigations. But at the same time, I don't know that necessarily has compliance impact for 121, given a substantial compliance approach to that paragraph.
Babs?
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Babs Vernelli, 75-year-old lifelong Portland resident. Love my city of roses and am cautiously optimistic about all the changes that the city will be going through as we transition into 2025. Tom, sir, thank you so much for all the information. I must admit my pea brain is about ready to explode, but I did take screenshots of all your slides so I can go back and study them in greater detail. Thank you. The other comment I want to make is I am 110% supportive of Portland Street Response. And I know there's things that need to be worked out, as you mentioned, the criteria for Portland Street Response versus ECIT. However, I just want to put that in there. And I know that PCCEP members have also been supportive of continued funding and use of Portland Street Response. And I see, as my understanding is, I see PSR as being a really, really helpful, useful partner with PPB. So that's just the comment again. And thank you for taking the time tonight to share all this information. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I'll echo you that I know that the COCL team, you know, in this iteration, as well as prior iterations of the COCL team and prior personnel that we've had, there's nothing but support for PSR as well. It is a very positive step that the city has taken, and they should be applauded for it.
In case anyone missed it, and responding to Babs's comment, PCCEP will post COCL's slides on our website after this meeting. Thanks.
Yep.
Are there any other questions or comments around the COCL report? Go ahead, Dan.
I'll bite. So I'd like to also press for the response to my comment about the force inspector changing over about every year, and how are you going to keep consistency in the way they identify outlier officers if they don't really have experience? I mean, 1 year is not that's just about the time that they're learning how their job works, and then they move on to something else.
No, I 100% agree with you on that. It's been difficult. There has been a number of different force inspectors who have taken over. What I can say about the current force inspector is that I know that we've had several conversations with him, and that he does seem to understand the charge that's under, you know, that he's, you know, the work that he's been charged with. There has been training, you know, SOPs and training components with the force inspectors. There is a need to continue that and to make sure that knowledge does get transferred. Hopefully that, you know, we won't have to repeat, you know, that we won't have a new force inspector. Aside from the new force inspector, though, one of the things that you know, I know that we've been impressed with is not only him, but the analysts that work under him. And there's you know, some analysts that have been there from the beginning, and who have been a common thread, and who have been able to understand where the evolution of the settlement agreement, or the evolution of PPB's force data analysis, and, you know, across the 9 years that we've been doing this job, there have been some substantial improvements in force data collection and force data analysis. And like I said, there's force analysts who have been there from the beginning and who can act as that. Again, with the complete agreement that having a more consistent individual, a person who's been more consistently in the force inspector's role would be nothing but a positive thing. You know, like I said at the beginning of our presentation, we don't run the bureau. I can't assign the force inspector to always be the same person. But I agree with you that it has been a challenge. But like I said, hopefully a challenge that won't be as present going forward. But again, without running in and taking over the bureau, I can't be the one that decides that.
Okay. Any other? We have time for one more. Go ahead, Jared.
Well, I don't have a question. I did just want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Christoph and his team. I think you alluded to 9 years of doing this work. And I know there's been various iterations of the COCL team, but you, my friend, have been a constant. And, you know, your service to this role and to diligently producing reports every quarter, presenting to the public. You know, we thank you for your service. I know we're getting ready to switch to a monitor, but at the same time, I know you're going to be involved in participating in that transition. But I want to take this public opportunity on behalf of the Department of Justice to thank you for your service to Portland and to the role of the COCL. I think it's been an invaluable process, not only helping the city and helping the Bureau be better, but also helping the Department of Justice do its role as plaintiff in the case. So thank you, Tom, Dr. Christoph. Appreciate you.
I appreciate that, Jared. And yeah, it has been an extremely interesting 9 years, but I know that all the community members here as well, they've contributed to it. You know, this has been the fun of preparing the reports, hearing the feedback, and you know, and the Department of Justice, PPB. So very much appreciate the collaborative effort that everybody's kind of taken to get us to where we are now.
Tom, do you have any of your staff here with you want to introduce?
I know Monique Jenkins is on. She was running the slides. I know it's also it's late for her. She's on East Coast time. There she is. But yeah, say hi, Miss Jenkins.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much.
Dan, I saw your question. The answer to that is unknown at this point, because whenever the new monitor comes on, there is a 30-day overlap period. Right now, I think that's still being discussed as to you know, what future reports might come out of it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tom. Really appreciate you coming again and giving a lot of really good insight to this report and helping bridge that gap between the reports and the community. So really appreciate you. Thank you, Dr. Christoph.
Yes, ma'am.
Next, we're going to go ahead and move into open public comment. At this time, open public comment is open to the public where you may make comments or questions around any of the other work that PCCEP is working on. So are there any other comments out there or questions? Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, I was trying to wait and not be the first in line. Hi, Dan Handelman again for Portland Cop Watch. So I mentioned briefly that I was at the Citizen Review Committee meeting earlier. This is becoming more and more of a problem that there's overlap on Wednesday nights. The PCCEP used to meet on Tuesday nights. CRC just moved one of their meetings, a subcommittee meeting, to Tuesday next week, so they wouldn't overlap again. But then there's almost always an overlap on the second Wednesday of the odd-numbered month, which is hard to remember, but that's when the Training Advisory Council meets. And so that's going to happen next week. So I don't know if there's a way to clear that up since you all work for the same city, but it's just frustrating to people who want to attend all the meetings. Tomorrow, May 2, is when the city council is going to decide whether or not they want to approve of the person that was nominated to be the independent monitor. So I've signed up to testify. I don't know if any of you have any comments about that. We're having more of a institutional analysis. You know, we're not picking on the team that got chosen. And the Cop Watch newsletter, the People's Police Report, just came out a couple of days ago and should be online in the next few days. So I'll send that information to the staff when it's ready so that you all can take a look at that. There's always an article about the DOJ and the PCCEP in there. And thank you very much for your hard work. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Others. Feels like a quiet bunch tonight.
Well, as Tom said, it's been a long 9 years, so
Yeah, if we start the call thinking that a Wednesday is a Friday, it must be a long week.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It has been a long week.
Okay.
Do we go to upcoming PPC events, dates and events, I guess?
Yeah, I was gonna add that. Thank you everybody for showing up, and Tom for presenting and managing through questions, and tell your friends it's community engaged policing. We need more community out here. So
Yes.
Dory, I think that's your cue.
We're just waiting on slides.
Oh, okay. Is there
And I
still
think-
slides?
And I think Byron's got this.
Okay, cool.
Cool. 33 people upcoming PCCEP dates and events. Wednesday, May 8th is the Community Engagement Subcommittee from 6 to 8. Everything will be on Zoom. Otherwise, notarized.
Yes, and just because it's a unique month, reminder again that so tomorrow is the special counsel approval of the monitor, like accepting the report more or less that advances them to the court process, and then on the 15th is the status conference hearing. The 15th is also the PCCEP full committee meeting, the same evening. So I expect that the committee may do a debrief of the status conference hearing in that meeting, but that agenda has not been finalized yet. So good way to stay tuned in to what happens in that hearing. Great. Thank you so much again to Tom and the COCL team, to our co-chairs, all of the community here tonight, and Frida, our facilitator. And with that, it is 7:50 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Recording stopped.